So I'm going to talk a little bit about some trends that are going on that really determine what and how we can write things and publish things. The biggest one is this consolidation within the industry. We have fewer big companies, and they're more focused on selling books and making a profit. And also, I want to talk about something that might be of interest as well, is how you develop your platform and your audience. And that's what I was talking to Bob about. There might be a broader audience out there that you're aware of, that you want to focus on. So you've answered my basic questions. Here are a couple of the key trends. So there are 1.5 to 4 million books written and published each year. And I was listening to an NPR report today on a British rock group. And one of the members said, he was asked, is it more difficult than when you started 20 years ago to produce a record? And he said, no, it's a lot easier. There's a lot more facility. You don't have to go to a big studio. You can, you get it produced relatively cheap. He said, but the problem is to get it heard, to get it distributed. And really, that tenet really that's the same situation with writing. Here we have up to 4 million new books every year. How do you get heard? And how do you get people to purchase your books? The number, as a result of some of these, the ongoing focus on importance of online platforms, almost 80% of all of your books are now sold online. So what are the implications of that? Number one, bookstores are dwindling. You probably noticed that. Barnes and Noble continues to reinvent itself, and they have been hanging in there, but it's been a slog. And a lot of your smaller, nice local book stores aren't able to make it. So book buyers are looking more towards Google and Instagram, Amazon. I use Facebook a good deal to get information about my work and my books and that sort of thing. But really, in the end, vertical marketing is the king. So one thing my daughter told me is when I do a post, whether it's on Twitter or whether it's on Facebook or wherever, you always put the hashtag. And then the hashtag allows you to target your audience, the people that you think are going to be interested. One of my favorite is book recommendations, because I'm a book reviewer. I'll talk about that. That has several 100,000 that follow that. Or if you tag it, read a book, it's another one I like. That has about 260,000 people that connect with it or look at it. So there are ways that you can using search engines like Google. There are ways that you can target certain audiences. And one of our challenges is to figure out, where do we fit in? What is trending? What's most interesting? So I started off with my memoir, which, as I mentioned to Denise, it was based on 40 years working around different parts of the world with different organizations. And fortunately, I always took notes. I always wrote trip reports. And even on my donor trips, I'd always have a report that I'd send to the donors afterwards with photographs, etc. And so that was the basis of different latitudes. So the question is, I think one of the key things, you want to follow your passion, really know who you are, because there's so many things, just like this morning, so many different interests that we have, different things we can discuss, but you have to focus on a certain genre, a certain type of information, potential audience, etc. My decision to write was a result of a rather traumatic situation. So, Bob, you can be waiting around for things to happen, or something can happen to you. I got a call the day before our biggest fundraiser at Hagar, where I was the CEO. We support families and children going through that have been trafficked, human trafficking. And I was informed that the board the day before had decided to change leadership. And so I said to the board chair, Joe, you got to be kidding. Tomorrow is our biggest mailing. We've worked all this last 4 months putting together an end of the year campaign. You don't want to do this now. And he gave me this song and dance about legally. Of course, I asked them why they decided this, because they had given me a heads up at all. And I was given this legal jargon. Well, we're in such and such a state. We don't have to tell you anything. So he went ahead and they did it. They made the change. And of course, they lost hundreds of thousands of dollars, and we projected millions of dollars of growth. They never saw that. But I asked myself, I've been working with not-for-profits for 45 years, and I've gotten some pretty weird things happening. And I mean, just because it's a Christian organization doesn't mean that they're going to act like Christians, as you all know. So I decided, no, this is my time to sit back and really share what I've learned and really help people, really promote certain things, certain values that I've had over the years. So that's how I ended up becoming an author. And the group I focused initially on was the Peace Corps writers, because they're the ones who published my book. As a matter of fact, and this made a big difference for me, because I had a publisher that I agreed in their values, and they had this very nice little seal there, the Peace Corps Worldwide, the Peace Corps Worldwide Writers Group. So that it was nice. I had a publisher. I had a focus on an audience. There are about 1,500 writers. That includes Paul Theroux, who did Mosquito Coast and 48 other books. There are about 250,000 members. Although it was published by the Peace Corps writers, it was all the work was done through Amazon, and we used at that time it was CreateSpace, and they even did the cover, which you can see there. I mean, those are my photos, and I told them, it's different latitudes. It deals with world understanding and geography. So, give me some type of a map, and they did. And so those are my pictures from places that I worked with over the years. And it had a bunch of photographs, and it had a map, and it had a timeline at the end. Timeline is always, I still pull the book out to people ask me, well, when were you in Bogota? And I have no idea. So I pulled the timeline. This was done by students. Both the map and the timeline were done by students at ASU. So I'm actually looking for some interns to do some work for me now. So it's a good source of workers, and it's a good opportunity for young students to get a little bit of experience. And the book eventually was recognized by the Arizona Authors Association for Best Nonfiction, and it was a good way to start my career. My next book, but you can only talk about yourself so often. So my next book would be a travel book, a little bit different. There was some good karma involved there. Now, you guys know this book was just named Best Travel Book by the Peace Corps Writers Group. I'm proud of that. And there are a lot of top-notch authors amongst those 1,500. So those are the type of things you get the hashtag, and you get it on all of your social media to let your audience know that you've been recognized in some way. But this book came about by the fact that I met a couple in Guatemala. I met them here in Phoenix. They had a little health development group called Seeds for Life down in Chocolat, down on the South Coast. And I got to know them, and I found out that Earl was also an author and a poet. And he does poems about my two favorite places, Guatemala and the Southwest. So I reviewed his book, and I sent it to his publisher, cyberwit.net in India, and that they liked it. And so about a week later, I said, look, you guys specialize in chapbooks, poetry chapbooks. Now, a chapbook is a book that's usually 50 pages or less. And they're very popular among poets because they have, they don't write 500-page books. So the chapbook is a good way to go. So what I did was I came up with a theme to tie together all of my story, all of my horror stories about travel. And I've accumulated a good deal, especially when you consider what happens when you're with donors. Tom will remember the time where we had to get some Sherpas to pull one of the donors off the top of one of those mountains in one of these cylindrical boxes. And just as he was leaving, his wife said, "Oh, this must have something to do with his heart problem." So I almost fell down the mountain myself. How did we get him way up there and nobody told us? So this book, the idea came from something that Paul Theroux said called "Travel is the saddest pleasures, it gave me eyes." And actually this theme inspired a guy called Moritz Thompson to write a book called My Saddest Pleasure. And that's what inspired me to put my stories together. And so I honor Paul Theroux, and I honor another guy, the author that's close by, Tom Miller. Both of them worked with me. Tom Miller wrote the Panama Hat Trail, The Revenge of the Saguaro, among other books. He's one of the best travel writers in the country, or he was. He passed on in December. And they were actually going to put together a book about Moritz Thompson. And I'll talk about that a little bit later because that's a book that I'm working on right now. So this book is just a result of good karma, good relationship I had with Earl, and trying to help him. Now, I've written about 80 reviews so far. And I think one of the key responsibilities of a writer is to our profession. And so I always try to do reviews that enhance and broaden the audience of other authors. I think that's important. All of my reviews are in Goodreads. They're also in the Midwest Review. I have they call the bookshelf there. And also I have a column in the Arizona Authors Association newsletter called the Million Mile Walker Review, What We're Reading and Why. And so usually I can get 2 reviews into each one of those newsletters. And then, of course, there's Goodreads and Amazon and other places like that. So that strengthens my platform. And it really, the nice thing is I get to know authors. I get to know some very excellent authors who give me great advice about what to do and what to do. Because I've never had a formal course in writing. I don't have an MF, whatever. So I have a lot of stories. So, but learning how to write is not easy, and it's nice to have professional assistance. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. The book I'm working on now is The Guatemala Reader, What You May Not Know and Why You Should Care. And let me just share a few sentences. They'll give you a sense of where I'm going with this. For every world traveler, there is a place in one's memory that is a paradise, mysterious, beautiful, and full of alluring secrets, a place where one can return to by closing one's eyes, a place that will never change in one's memory. Guatemala is mine. And basically, I've taken the about 20 essays that I've had published over the years, most of them in Review Magazine, which is a magazine that has an audience about 45,000 people throughout Central America. A lot of them are expats. It's an English magazine. And like a lot of magazines, they were forced to leave their hard copy edition, and they did an online edition, which I love because online magazines allow you all the space you want and all the photographs you want. So if you check out some of my articles on my website, I've written about 30 essays that have been published. You'll see that they're filled with great photographs, graphics, that sort of thing. So that's one of the nice things about working online. And also it has a broader audience, and it always introduces you to a broader number of people outside of your normal circle. So I organized my essays in the form of literary biographical prisms. I highlight mostly other people, so it's not about me. These are usually the other authors and Guatemalan leaders, like this guy right up here. This is Victor Montejo. Now, I knew about Victor many years ago. Those of you who know Guatemala might have seen this, The Adventures of Mr. Putasin Among the Mayans. Okay, I probably read this 25 years ago. Well, this is the guy that wrote it. It's a fabulous little story about adventurers, American adventurers who come into a village, and the villagers, they're Mayan, of course, and they're waiting for a new Catholic priest. So they think these adventurers are the priest. The one guy is a priest. So they start sharing all of these things, and it's about all the misadventures, misunderstandings, and at the very end, the gringos divide up some loot from relics from one of the traditional sites, sort of spiritual sites of the Mayans, and they walk off with them. That was the end of the story. But this guy, he was forced into exile during the Civil War, like a lot of people were, and he wrote a book called Voices from Exile. And he also wrote Maya Intellectual Renaissance and Entre Dos Mundos. Those are all books that I reviewed. And so one of my articles is about his life, because he was a pretty well-known anthropologist at California University, Berkeley. And he decided, once he retired, this is what his son is a doctor, his daughter's an artist, another daughter's a hospital administrator. But when he retired, he went back to Hacotenango and Huehuetenango. And that's where he lives now. He's still writing books. So I thought this is really incredible story. Somebody who was a teacher, forced out of the country because of these, the army that were after him. And he gets some support, goes up to Connecticut, gets a degree, gets a doctorate, becomes an anthropologist, and retires back to his community. And he's been sharing his stories ever since. His website is called Mayalog.
What?
Mayalog. Victor Montejo is his name. So the book that I'm working on, it's divided up between these prisms. I talk about different authors. Another author I focused on was Francisco Goldman. He wrote The Art of Political Murder, which is about the killing of the priest Girardi. And it was picked up by HBO and made into an award-winning documentary. And I've gotten to know Francisco over the years. We talk about what's happening in Guatemala, including the existing presidential challenges, debacle, elections, and that sort of thing. And I actually asked him to write an introduction to this book. So we'll see if that happens. I'd love to have somebody with his connections to Guatemala. He is Guatemalan. His last book that I reviewed is called Monkey Boy, because his father was Russian, Jewish, and then he had German in there, and his mother was from Maya in highlands of Guatemala. So he has quite an eclectic, diverse cultural background. He's a fabulous writer. He's gotten all kinds of different awards. So at this point, I still need to find a publisher for it. I might self-publish it. I'll talk about why to do one or the other in a little bit. I need an editor. I need to have a book cover. I've got a few people I'm in touch with, but haven't seen anything yet. I need an intern to do some research for that data. That's where I am right now with the Guatemala Reader. And so the question is to publish or not. Now, there's a big difference as far as how many people can see your book, level of credibility your book gets, and the cost. So I had a friend who recently published a book that I just reviewed not too long ago. Great book. And he worked through iUniversity. And they're a pretty well-known publishing company. But, you know, they spent $15,000 to $20,000. Why? Because what happens now is publishing companies, they're focused on providing services and selling services to authors, not selling books. Now, the worst example of that, of course, are your vanity publisher. Vanity publisher, they focus specifically, Bob, you want to do something for your family? We'll do it nice and clean and cheap, and it'll look professional, but it's just for, you know, it's for your own personal enjoyment and for a very small audience. So that's your vanity groups. So I'm sort of taking a look at different options. Here's what one author friend wrote me just too long ago. She wrote a book called Democracy. She was former CIA, worked in Russia, speaks Ukrainian, Russian, and she knows a lot about Russia and about Putin. She said, it is tough to a question to answer traditional self-publishing. The question that must be answered is, are you searching for distribution or trying to earn a living? I have tried traditional publishing first because I knew nothing about publishing. It worked to some degree, but cost a small fortune and paid next to nothing. Marketing and the whole lot of services had separate costs. That's why you can get up to $20,000 to publish a book. It was easy to spend $10K and still not get the book out there to the public. On the other hand, Don McCauley, who is a shared friend of ours, I met Don through the Author Show. He has a group called freepublicity.com. He knows how to get the book out through Amazon with far fewer dollars. But Amazon only does Kindle online and soft cover. Now they do hardcover. She says, though, their hardcover does not have glossy cover. I guess if I had to do it over again, I'd do it with Don. In other words, I do it through Amazon, which produces the book, and then you have your distributor right there as well. So those are a couple of the different options, why you take one over the other. In the end, since your companies have been consolidated down to your top 4 or 5, period. And only the biggest authors that are writing about something that's really going to have a larger audience, they're the only ones that these companies are going to be interested in. So where does that leave the majority of writers? You know, you're up a creek unless you learn some of these other things and you look at some other options, which includes, self-publishing. So there's a little bit about the options. My experience, one of the keys to distribution and broadening your audience is to develop your author's platform. So one of the first things I did was develop the Million Mile Walker Review. I put together my own little, my book mark and my poster, which you can see right here. And so, and I do a lot on Twitter, a lot on Facebook, a lot on, Instagram and that sort of thing. And here's my focus as far as all of my writing I can tie together on these 3 or 4 things: celebrating international travel and literature, cross-cultural relationships, overseas development, philanthropy, and social justice. So you can find all that on millionmilewalker.com. Got my book marks. The social media, as I mentioned, I use that quite a bit. Also LinkedIn, which is, nobody does a resume anymore. They're on LinkedIn. But that's really a lot of people, like good audience, good professionals on there. So I always post things and update things. If I get an award or a book's published or an article's published, I always get it on LinkedIn. And also I have a monthly blog, the Million Mile Walker Dispatch, which I sent to you all, so you could check it out. And the last one that I did that just dropped on Monday, it was about the making of this Guatemala Reader. And then I sent one other link for you, which was an interview. That's something else that's important. If you get interviews, that's a broader audience of people you've never been in touch with. So I've been interviewed twice by the Global Connections TV. Global Connections is aired on the UN and at universities all over the world. So it has a very broad, good international audience. And then there's another group there that interviewed me. So getting interviews, getting articles published, and having a monthly dispatch. And I have maybe 1,500 people that follow me, but only a third of them actually open things and read them. But that's okay, because from my perspective, if you're doing something monthly, you're being forced to write. You're being forced to express your opinion on things you care about, and you're able to talk about your next book or whatever. And all those things accumulate. Just like all of my articles at Review Magazine, you get to a point where you say, I've got a lot of really great, interesting things here. I could organize them in such a way that I could do a chapbook or a book or whatever. One of the reasons I like to write essays for journals is every one of those literary journals has their own audience. So you get a whole new, different audience. I just submitted one to Wanderlust Journal. So I'm a contributor to Review, to Wanderlust, and to Literary Traveler. So those are all publications that take my articles, and they have a pretty good base. And applying for awards, that's something else that's worthwhile doing, so you get some recognition. Here's just a little bit more on the interviews, videos, and all of that. You already know about Global Connections, the Global TV Talk, and here's some information about that multimedia program that freepublicity.com, Don McCauley does. So they dropped it on August 9th, a year ago. It got over 38,000 impressions around the world, 461 news sites, 200 is considered good. And what is the goal of all of this? It's to wake up Google. So Google knows where Million Mile Walker is, and there's connections to people that are interested in travel writing and international affairs. So I had 80 links to my site, and I found the press release that he wrote and distributed. I found it on the London Journal, on the Singapore Journal, all kinds of different publications around the world, letting people know about this new book. So I reached about 95 of the 130 search engines. So each one of those search engines, like Google, that sends your things out to hundreds of thousands of people. That's why Don focuses on search engines. Now, as far as how many more books were actually sold, I've always been challenged trying to figure out how many books, but that's not why I write, and that's not the only thing that I write. But I know a lot more people read my work and hopefully liked it. Some of the one thing that these online literary journals do is they actually count how many views you get. So I've had articles that have gotten 1,500 or 1,600 people that have read them. So those are people that probably hadn't heard of my work at all. So that's a little bit on developing your And, you know, my philosophy, and you folks will appreciate this with all the work that you've done with challenging areas of the world, is failure is okay. Failure is a good thing. It's an opportunity to learn, and you know, you're sort of walking out doing things that you're not necessarily comfortable with, but you get a quick learning curve. So I wrote an article about immigration issues a few years ago called Trouble in the Highlands. It was published by Worldview magazine, which is the Returned Peace Corps volunteer journal. And I took those stories and tried to do a documentary. And I worked with a guy by the name of Hal Rifkin. His book called The Singapore Quartet is going to be on NPR in another month or two. So he knows what he's doing as a cinematographer. And we had a lot of good interviews, and then COVID hit. And we lost our momentum, and we didn't raise the money. You need $200,000 to $300,000 to do one of these, a decent documentary. So it didn't work out. But all of those stories, I published a lot of them, and that's the basis of this next book. So that was a big, we put 3.5 years into trying to make the documentary. It didn't work, but I learned a lot about filming documentaries, met a lot of interesting people, and the stories ended up becoming a book. So how do you measure your success? Maya Angelou says, the idea is to write it so that people hear it and it slides from their brain and goes straight to their hearts. And, you know, a lot of the work that I do in regards to immigration, explaining why people come from Guatemala and why this is not an issue of invasion or mobs of people and they're drug addicts, etc., is to develop a little bit of empathy and appreciation for who these people are, what they represent, and how much they can add to our country and to our culture. And so about 4 or 5 of the articles in my Guatemala Reader are about immigration emanating from Guatemala, what's behind it. And one of those profiles I do is of Luis Argueta, who won the Orden del Quetzal as a filmmaker. And Luis he's done about 5 or 6 amazing documentaries, U-Turn and 4 or 5 others. And he's one of my favorite guys, and his documentaries are amazing, and they've had an impact. I met him down at ASU here in Tempe, and got to know him a little bit. So we do a lot of work together, and his stories are going to be in this book. So how do you what do you look at to measure success? Of course, books published, books sold, number of views, and as far as articles. What have you done to give back to your profession? I'm a member of about 3 or 4 literary associations: Arizona Authors Association, Phoenix Writers Group, Phoenix Writers Club, and a few others. And that's where I get a lot of my information and support. And I'm able to support them by doing articles for their newsletters and getting things published and that sort of thing. And I've given presentations on writing and publishing for a lot of these groups over the years as well. So here are a couple of resources, just a little tiny list. And really, if you guys you want to pursue some type of a project, you have questions, where to start, where to get some resources, I'm happy to be a lot more specific. But the Reader's Digest magazine is my favorite. They have the best down-to-earth information. Poet and Writers is good. I have a subscription to Duotrope. This is an online publication that helps you search and also track all the places that you submit your books and your articles to. So you can track whether they've been sitting there for 5 months and you need to bing them or what. And then you track which ones were actually published and which ones weren't. So I love Duotrope. I don't know what I'd do without it. New Pages always has good information on publications, new journals that are receiving submissions. And the Writer's Market is the big monstrous publication that has everything about publishing. Literary Hub is a good online source of information and a podcast. Grammarly, I use that quite a bit. That's a basically they do editing, so you get your work one editing through a pretty good source, and then I have it. Of course, I have it proofread, and then it's ready to go. Ready to go. Literary Writing Associations I mentioned, and the best book to start off with is The Business of Being a Writer by Jane Friedman. And I've got a bunch of other ones up here if anybody's interested. I have a few on how to write a memoir, how to write a proposal, all of that sort of thing. So what's next? I want to publish that Guatemala Reader. I have another book that's written and it's been submitted. I haven't heard a peep from the editor for 3 months, but I'm keeping my cool. Takes a while sometimes. It's called Moritz Thompson, the Best American Writer No One Has Heard About. Now, Moritz wrote Living Poor, and some of you guys might have read it. It was very popular, just like 2 Ears of Corn. Every returned Peace Corps volunteer had to read in Latin America, read this book. And Moritz was in Ecuador on the Pacific coast in a Black coastal community. And he's a fabulous writer, very transparent, just very talented writer. And I was inspired by the fact that Paul Theroux and Tom Miller, those two authors I mentioned, in 1997, they were going to write a book celebrating Moritz Thompson, and they never got around to it. But Tom Miller had 5 boxes of materials that he took with me and gave them to the University of Arizona library. And that's where I got the material for this other book about Moritz Thompson. And basically, this will be a book of essays that other authors like Paul Theroux, Tom Miller, and others have written about, and myself have written about Moritz Thompson. And next year, we hope to get back to Guatemala again. It's been quite a while. So that's just a little overview on my trajectory as a writer, a little bit about publishing, and I'm open to questions.
Is Grammarly a subscription? Do you pay something to use?
Yes. It's $5 or $8 a month or something like that. But it actually even corrects your emails. So sometimes we get a little sloppy. I do a lot of communication by email, but they actually edit that too. So I find it very useful, Grammarly.
So how is GPT chat going to transform?
Yeah, how is it not going to is really the question, Paul. I mean, that is an amazing thing. We already have 4 million books coming out a year, and there's a possibility that you could have the chat writing actual books. And so that's why the screenwriters and the writers in Hollywood are on strike right now. We need to get a hold of this before it gets out of hand, and you can't have just anybody putting in a few inquiry questions and coming up with an article or a book. So this is time to pay attention. I've used it on a number of different projects. It's really amazing tool. I even used it for one of my book reviews, and it came up with things that other people had said about my critique of the book that I wanted to review. And it's amazing how much information it can get. But I think we have to be disciplined in how we use it and when. My attitude is if I only would want to use it if it's about something that I'm really aware of and I understand, so you can go through and pick out the things that are not not true. And I think eventually there's probably going to have to be a place in the information at the beginning of the book where you have your IPM, your IBN number, the book number, and all of this. I think in the future they'll probably have to reveal whether or not you've used the chap to actually write any of your book. I think that'll be something that you're going to have to be transparent about, and you have to be willing to sort of defend. So that's my take on the chap.
Mark, have you submitted your work to publishers? Like, you know, Jim showed his book that was published by Sage. They do a lot of academic publishing. There's a magazine I used to subscribe to called Granta that has a really wide coat of interest.
Yeah, that's a fabulous magazine. Yeah.
Really good. And, you know, Penguin House does tons of travel books, I think.
They're one of the big 4 or 5.
But so have you submitted your work to the big publishers or to magazines? And what's been your,
Well, as I
outside
mentioned,
of your Return Peace Corps people, you know, out into
exactly.
the
No,
world?
as far as the literary journals, so over 28 of my articles have been published. So that's in Literary Traveler, Wanderlust Journal. You know, there are about 15 different magazines that have published my work. And I have submitted my work to larger publications, and I haven't had very much success. I submitted the Guatemala Reader to the Western New Mexico University because I actually met the editor, and they were close to the border, and a lot of my articles are about immigration and about people coming up from Guatemala. So I thought there might be some synergism. But they said, no, we're really looking for something where we feel that we're, you know, walking alongside you, and you're telling a story and all of this. And that's not the purpose of the book. They missed the whole purpose of the book, which is these are Guatemalans and other stories, not my story. And I'm not telling it in a sort of a narrative way. I'm telling it from the voice and from the perspective of other people who are either Guatemalan or have been impacted from Guatemala. And that sort of gave me a heads up of the disadvantage of going with a publisher, because you lose control of what you actually are going to have done and how you do it. And, you know, the Guatemala Reader is something very personal to me because of my relationship to Guatemala and all the time I put into it, etc. And I'm not willing to just, you know, listen to and change what some publication wants just to sell a few more copies. So those are the type of decisions that we have to make. And I have submitted things to Granta and a few of the really big magazines, you know, but I haven't had any luck so far. But I've, as I mentioned, I'm a contributor to 3 or 4 different magazines that do publish my work, and they have a pretty decent audience, and so I'm happy with that.
Another question, I've a number of friends who have published books. One dear friend published an extraordinary memoir with photos about her gardening and so forth. She self-published it. She's wealthy, so she could spend the money on this gorgeous coffee table kind of book with color pictures and so forth. But the way she wrote the book was fascinating to me. She had a writer's group, and they gathered together often and presented their writing to each other and gave each other feedback and help that way. That was kind of how she did it, instead of just sitting at her desk and writing. Another friend did it by recording a whole bunch of stuff, not writing at the keyboard, but doing recordings and then having it transcribed, and then someone helped her edit it. My older brother wrote a book and he pitched it. It was actually his master's thesis, but he tweaked it and then pitched it to the University of Texas Press, and they published it. It was the biography of a Civil War officer who was also a cattle rancher or something. Anyway, it had all of a sudden for about 5 years, he was like a star Civil War authority, which tickled his family. But what's your process, your writing process? You've talked a great deal about what you do afterwards. But what's yours? How do you do it?
Well, I wrote an article and about that theme, looking for the book here. Here it is. And it's called Daily Rituals. And so this book talks about all of the great writers and what do they do to get started each day? What do they do to stay motivated?
Yeah.
All kinds
Good
of
for
great things. So I actually wrote, did a presentation to one of the libraries up here in Cave Creek about what my daily rituals are and how I start the day. So I start the day with the New York Times and different overseas publications just to get a sense on what's going on. I connect with my author friends, share information. I try to write, whether it's my blog or an article, I try to write for a couple of hours every day. And I'm always doing research based on certain themes that I have. And then when I get enough information together and I get inspired, then I figure out, well, how can I put this together as a book? And that's what I've been doing with the Guatemala Reader. And I'm at the point now where I'm sharing it with different groups and submitting it, etc. To your first friend who worked with those small group of writers, all of those associations I mentioned, they all have writers groups. And unfortunately, I haven't been very good about that, but that's a great way to get good information. What I do is I share my information with authors that have a similar background, who are either returned Peace Corps volunteers or worked overseas. And those are the people that I tend to get feedback. And as far as the lady that did the audio, she was just talking, audiobooks now are one of the largest, publishing growth areas. And
Sure. She told her story into the text. She didn't,
right,
the audiobooks come after you've published it, then
exactly.
you record it. But
Right.
I'm talking more about how you write. I mean, I've heard tips that say you should just go to whatever it is. Do you like the pen and paper? You like the keyboard? You want an audio thing? But you should just do something every day for 2 hours, even if you can't figure out what you're going to do, you just do it. So you just are continually working your brain. And then with Linda, her book, I think it helped her with her actual writing, the composition, the writing, the words and the paragraphs and the themes or whatever. I can't even talk about what it is I'm trying to say, but
Yeah, and that's really, I enjoy getting feedback from other authors to really help me, because I have the stories. I don't have the formal writing skills. So for me to have a good editor and to have somebody who does, works with me is important. But yeah, I try to write or research, for a good 4 to 5 hours a day. So I'm sitting right here in my office, sharing things, getting new stories. I post a lot of things on Facebook or Twitter that eventually I'll turn into a mini story in my blog, and that might be grow to be something larger. I was doing a lot of work on racism and what that was about. And eventually I decided to tell my own story about being here in the United States and situations where racism occurred, where in my community that I was totally unaware of and aloof of. And I turned that into an article and I've submitted it. So these stories, they can grow and they can become something that's a little bit more serious. And then you have to figure out where is the magazine or the publishing company that's going to be interested. and allowing you to formalize that, make that into an article or a book. But that's why I'm always posting. I'm always writing articles, and I'm always writing book reviews, because every time you read a book review, you get to know the author, how they write, because you're actually critiquing it, and you learn something about whatever it is that they're writing about. I just finished up End Times, that I highly recommend. It's about the growing power of elites and how throughout history the situation has been, once the elites the power becomes too concentrated, that's where societies begin to degenerate, to break apart. And he says that's, to a degree, that's what we're seeing here in the United States. So every time you pick up a book, you learn a new perspective, you learn about the author, and you learn about whatever theme that is. That's one of the reasons I'm always, every night I sit down for an hour to an hour and a half and read. So that's something else that's specific. After I do dinner and we watch something, I always read either some articles or a book that I'm reviewing. So those are some of my own daily rituals.
Gotcha.
I have a question, Mark. And when you're doing this writing a little bit every day, how do you keep the thoughts together in your files, like on your computer? Do you have like folders that you put ideas that are heading in different directions in, or do you just let it all be together and look for it? How do you?
Well, that's the nice thing about doing my blog, the Million Mile Walker Dispatch, is I have 4 or 5 different categories: what we're reading and why, culture watch, and usually whatever theme or issue that is, it relates to one of those categories, and I put it in there.
So basically, your blog helps keep your ideas headed in the same direction.
Yeah, and also I have folders. I have a folder on Guatemala. I have a folder on, different themes and this sort of thing, and then I could just put them in there as well.
Great. Anybody else have a question? We're about to hit our 2-hour mark. Any questions more for Mark?
I would just change the subject totally and just listen to if he has a couple comments about the Guatemalan election and what's going to happen between now and January and after January.
Well, like a lot of people, I'm recovering from the shock that Bernardo Arévalo, who is the son of the former president, the only really democratically elected president from the 1950s, somehow came out of the middle of nowhere and became the key candidate. And then he ended up winning 68% of all the votes. This is just astounding, because Guatemala has been caught in a quagmire of totally incompetent and corrupt presidents for the last 3 presidents at least. One of them was a clown, and it was not funny, some of the things that came out of his regime. But they call the elites in Guatemala the Pacto de Corruptos, and they really are. It's people are being bought off constantly, and big corporations. You would have thought after United Fruit that some things might have been learned about the consequences of letting a large corporation control an entire part of your economy. Well, now we have Canadian nickel companies, palm oil companies, mining companies of all sorts that are getting the same type of leeway and throwing people off their land and that sort of thing. A little sidelight, a lady by the name of Lucretia Mack just passed on, and Lucretia's mother was Myrna Mack, who was the anthropologist that was killed by U.S. supported forces in the 1950s. And her daughter was actually the Minister of Health, and she was one of the deputies. And she was part of the Semilla program, which is this new party that Arevalo is part of, and she was going to be a member of the cabinet, and she just passed away from ovarian cancer. I just got an email from Chatti, which was said, we're just totally devastated. We were really looking towards the what they call the new spring and a new change with the Samia group. But you can rest assured that the political group in power will not stop, and they'll try to keep Arevalo from taking office. So what have they done? Is they made the party illegal. So we have a president. He doesn't represent a party now. So we're going to be seeing more of this chicanery. And when you lose good quality leaders like Lucretia Mack, it really is a tragedy because there aren't that many really good quality. And one last thing, let's not forget that the government threw out a lot of the best candidates like Thelma Calderon, who was Mayan and won 10% of the vote the last election, more than any other Mayan ever has. And they came up with some excuse, so she wasn't able to even run. So that's the type of thing. And of course, as you know, Mary, over 50 members of the judiciary and the attorney general have had to either flee the office or leave their positions because of death threats and that sort of thing. So it's going to be a long haul ahead, but at least there's a new leader that it doesn't represent the Pacto de Corruptos that is looks like he's going to be able to at least take the presidency, because the existing president actually invited him to the palace and formally accepted him. So that's a good sign. But it's going to be a long, difficult haul, and we need to be paying attention because human rights groups are going to have to be there close by when they start putting people into jail, etc. So that's my take on Guatemala. And I'm going to have an updated chapter in my book about what's happening in Guatemala. And of course, the presidential election will be foremost in that presentation.